Tell me.
What I've really liked about ESA is that it's been an adventure the whole time. And it started off being an adventure, and it still is an adventure. We things that come to my mind almost immediately. The first time we came out here before the school was even here,
It's okay.
we had a picnic. It was after the first year of ESA, and we had a picnic out here. And we're sitting around, and a cottonmouth snake came up and crawled around the table. So we had to chase that away, and that's kind of typical. In the early days, we had Mr. Sidney's horses come over and visit us. We had his bulls and cows come over. Do you remember that? Were you here for any of that?
I do remember that.
Of course, people talk about in the early days having the portalette set up and everything, but I hardly remember that. That wasn't such a big deal for me because I could always go out in the woods. Then some of the other adventures we had, of course, were started by Rod Smith, the first headmaster. Back then it was called Wolf Creek that we all went to. Did you go to Wolf Creek?
I did.
And now the name has been changed to Globe Trek with the 8th grade class, but it's still basically the same idea and the same things are done. Another big adventure was the trip to Europe that we do every year with the seniors. And it was, I remember Bob Nielsen's first year as the headmaster. Mary, my wife, and I went to London over Thanksgiving. And when we came back, Bob asked us how that was and how we felt about it. And he said, well, why don't we just take the whole senior class? Will you help us? And I said, sure. So the first trip, Mary and Bob Nielsen and Vaughn Baker and I, and maybe one or two other people, maybe Amos, I'm not sure if you went along or not, but we did the whole trip ourselves. We rented a van, and we just drove around. And the first time we drove, in England you drive on the wrong side of the road, and we were driving stick shifts too. And so not only do you drive on the wrong side of the road, you sit on the wrong side of the car, and so the shift is over on this side. And so within about 10 minutes I had sideswiped a van, and so that was sort of embarrassing, and I was kind of paranoid the rest of the time. But we drove that year, and I think we drove the next year, and then we gave it up and hired professionals to do it. In the early years, a person would be crossing the street and would look the wrong way in London and get hit by a car. Did that happen with you in your class?
No, I think they probably had trained us by now.
A boy named Jeff, somebody who looked the wrong way, and bam, he got hit. Fortunately, he was all right. I think it's happened 2 or 3 times in London, never without severe casualties. So that's something that's an adventure we do. It was the Rio Grande trip. The first time we went out there, David went with me, and Sidney Abear, and I think we were the only chaperones. Mark Crotty was along too. Back then you didn't have to have a female chaperone on the trip. And a lot of the rules have changed. And we went through the park in Big Bend National Park, and that was the first time we did it. We went on an old mini bus, and we packed about 20 people into that, plus all our gear, and somehow we made it out there, and we made it back. We had some close calls. Sidney Abear paddled with his granddaughter, Leah, who's an ESA alumna, and Corey, his grandson. who didn't go to ESA, and they were in a big Grumman canoe, and they all paddled together. And Sydney would paddle in the back and count strokes. They were only about 7 or 8 years old then, so it was a big adventure for them. And I remember the first year out there, we had a terrible windstorm. We met Rod Smith's group from a school in Texas out there, barely met them, and we had a really good time with them. It took a couple of years for me to work up the nerve to go back, because I wanted to go to another part of the Rio Grande, which has a lot of rapids in it. It's called the Lower Canyons of the Rio Grande, and the guidebooks all warned that it was very dangerous and everything. So the first year I took all boys. And did you go on that trip, David? It was with Matt Williams and some other boys. There were about 5 or 6 of them, most of them from New Iberia, of course. And we had a really good time. The Rio Grande back then ran higher than it does now, so the waves were just huge. And I remember when we checked in, we had to register and with the ranger, and I filled out the form, and he looked at it, and he said, "Have you made out your will yet?" And then he laughed hysterically, and I had kind of second thoughts, but I wanted to show the guy up too. I kind of had that backup, and so we ran it that year with no casualties, and since then we've gone back with girls and boys almost every year, and that's become a real ESA tradition too. And I hope somebody takes that over when I cross to the other side of the Rio Grande. That's it for me.